So all of you have AI in your products. I'm curious how you wrap your head around the cost and the gross margins associated with it. It's really cool being an AI company. It's also really expensive being an AI company. How do you manage that?
That's the reason why the panel before this was VCs. I think everyone's on a growth journey and prioritizing that. And I think the economic model of all of these businesses, everyone's trying to figure out what that's going to look like in time. I know because I see it in our customers' pricing models, which started out with a lot of people eating the cost of all the token consumption. And now people are both trying to pass through that token consumption and figure out ways to add margin on top as the models change their pricing frequently. And they're constantly trying to figure out the best way to put that on the customer. And we're seeing a lot of people experiment with commitments that can get burned down across seats and usage and tokens that create a slightly more customer-friendly experience with controls and commitment, but at the same time, flexibility in how that gets used.
Fred, does gross margin matter and why?
Oh, deeply matters. I think from day one, we were actually thinking about how to price these wildly bespoke products with a really solid software gross margin. And we've actually stuck to that. On tokens, we are massive users of all types of tokens.
You're token maxing?
If we want to talk finance and jump scares, then we can start talking our Claude bills. I'm trying to get us a couple of plaques and some handshake from Dario, and I think it might happen soon. I've been told that we're one of the largest consumers amongst them. We have traditional software R&D work, which is invested and actually goes towards the product that we're selling. That's all great, very easy to price, very easy for us to consider in terms of the cost of goods sold. Where it gets tricky is with hosted evals, where we are reselling tokens. That's a place for us where, we're not trying to extract software-like gross margins necessarily. It's a product where everyone knows the cost of a token from the vendors. That's where we'll think about that more as like a cost plus kind of model. We see this with a couple of vendors in the market too. Like if you're looking at an open router type of a vendor, often you'll see that they'll host and then charge you for tokens plus some margin on top of that. I think that's how we're thinking about your token consumption, but for everything else, we're doing pretty well so far managing to a margin in the midst of token maxing.
It reminds me of that scene in The Big Short when he's like, I think they're confessing. He's like, I don't think they're confessing. I think they're bragging. That's like what you see with these AI companies putting up the leaderboards. It's like that system engineer at Duolingo consumed that many tokens. That's crazy. Raul, how are you thinking about costs?
Maybe this is the inveterate banker in me. So don't try this at home. When I think about our North Star, I agree with others that, kind of conventional best-in-class SaaS metrics at a point in time are not super helpful. What is the terminal value of a business like Rogo 3 to 5 years out? And what do we look like in that world? The weights on gross margin today, the components, the major components, it's inference, we were just talking about, content, for us especially, servicing all these financial data sources to our customers. Embedded support, our forward deployed bankers and our parlance who show up. Bankers expect to get paid. But you think about really those as being the three big drivers. And you kind of tick down the list and you think, wow, in 3 to 5 years, our market positioning and ability to manage those costs looks very different. I would be surprised if in 3 to 5 years you have one model provider that has premium pricing and a kind of commanding market position over the others. On content, as we get bigger, we're able to amortize, our content costs over a larger base. We're able to have leverage over our content suppliers. So that looks different as well. And then you'd like to think that a lot of the embedded customer support, advisory type work also scales sublinearly. So when I added all that up, I think, all right, well, I'm managing to something that in 3 to 5 years looks maybe not quite SaaS level, but a lot more like SaaS. And that's the North Star. In the meantime, invest for growth.
I do think a lot of the SaaS companies of yesteryear, call it 5, 8 years ago, they had what I would call big arms and skinny legs. They had amazing gross margins, but their OpEx was nuts. It was off the charts and they were burning a lot of money. I'm wondering if it becomes the opposite, where companies start doing leg day, but the biceps aren't as big as before because it's just a different profile. But at the end of the day, like you said, the terminal value is predicated on cash flow. So how you get to it may not matter as much. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, Raul.
I think there's a real possibility. I try to have a certain amount of epistemic humility. One way to frame exactly what you're saying, CJ, is there are probably users of the likes of FactSet and CapIQ in this audience. And maybe I just triggered them by invoking those pieces of software. But nonetheless, if you look at classic per seat costs for those tools, it was in the few $1,000s a year, depending on the size of your firm, et cetera. It's probable to me that the equivalent token spend, and we may have a different concept of seats and headcount in a couple of years, but the equivalent probably looks more like 10, 20,000, maybe more for a period of time. Let's see. even if you have a lower gross margin and your gross margin is, I'm making this up, 30% on 10,000 or 20,000, you have maybe a third to a half of the contribution margin coming in, but it's on a base that's 3 to 5 times higher, and you actually come out ahead. In the end, if it's all about cash flow, you have a higher value. If you have a higher equity value business.
Fred, do you think that over time we'll be spending the same or potentially more on tokens per employee than what their OT is?
This is going to be so subjective. I think that from what I see amongst my peers and amongst software developers, it's so easy to just start spending and spending and spending and spending, and then you don't even notice it, and then all of a sudden you spend north of your salary. There has to be a rationalization of that at some point. I have to think CFOs are going to start looking at the bills, and I tend to think that we're probably going to see some sort of a rationalization and digestion here of some of the token spend. But on the other hand, if there is real value, like I, for one, see tremendous value being realized from investing money into tokens right now, I can make the case that token consumption will continue to rise. Perhaps not uniformly at every single business, but amongst those businesses where there's a real use case, I would certainly expect it to rise.
Rebecca, how are you thinking about investing in costs? Because in order to compete, you have to still build a lot of the stuff that people love and need in their workflows, but then you're adding AI on top of that. How are you managing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's both something that we think about in terms of where do we invest people resources, like at the company? How do we split up product and engineering focus? How do we split up post-sale focus? Those are like internal investment decisions that we're making on how much do we internally need to focus on core product and integrations and security and all the things that people care about, even before we get to the massive investments that we're making in AI.
Remember when pricing was simple? One product, one subscription, one invoice every month. Those days are over. The AI economy is changing how everything gets bought and sold. We're seeing usage-based pricing, hybrid contracts, and something called a credit. The finance systems built for vanilla subscriptions weren't designed for this. This isn't just a rev rec problem anymore, because outdated revenue architecture can kill a great pricing idea before it ever reaches the market. Right Rev lets you recognize revenue in whatever shape it comes in. Whether you're launching consumption credits or testing entirely new commercial models, Right Rev gives finance the flexibility to support whatever pricing model comes next. So product teams can keep on innovating and finance teams can keep pace. If you're architecting revenue for the AI economy, learn how RightRev can help. Visit rightrev.com/CJ. That's me. That's rightrev.com/CJ.